already had a bird/grief story earlier this year on Netflix with Penguin Bloom, but this go round it's The Starling with Melissa McCarthy and Chris O'Dowd. Are you going to be adding it to your watch list? After a woman suffers a loss, a battle with a territorial bird over the dominion of her garden provides an unlikely avenue for her grief and the courage to heal her relationships and rediscover her capacity for love. So we have a grieving couple who's played by McCarthy and O'Dowd. Now, if you've seen the trailer, we see that O'Dowd is in a facility to help him deal with his sorrow, while McCarthy struggles alone at home. While working in the garden one day, she's attacked by this random bird who's pretty relentless in trying to keep her out of the yard. The premise sounds a little basic and even weak, or at least it's overly depressing, where we follow a couple who are trying to move through the stages of grief. Now, while this does linger in the sadness some, it's also got some humor spread throughout to brighten our spirits as the story goes along. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Melissa McCarthy, but I do believe that she has the ability to give us powerful performances. And honestly, I think she really needs to stay away from the purely comedic roles and then dive headlong into the drama genre. She was wonderful in Can You Ever Forgive Me, and currently she is killing it with 9 Perfect Strangers. In The Starling, she crafts a very powerful and sympathetic character. I mean, she is relatable, dynamic, raw, and believable, and then she still gets to take part in some funny moments. I mean, in fact, I think she's downright hilarious in certain parts. Plus, she gets to do a little physical humor as well, but the main bent of her performance is still grounded in drama. I loved watching her in this, and I found myself going through a lot of the feels that she was experiencing. She conveyed an awesome level of emotion for each scene that ran the gamut of feelings. And as to be expected, Chris O'Dowd is wonderful as well. He does take a pretty large backseat to McCarthy though, but he really displays a downtrodden and depressed character on the brink of despair. Their interactions are also heartbreaking and explosive at times, but there's also some quiet tenderness that comes forward as well. A great addition to the cast is Kevin Kline. He's playing a veterinarian who helps McCarthy to identify the attacking bird and then help her also with some solutions. I love their conversations and dynamic as they are pretty layered with meaning. They also provide a mix of dry humor that helps to break up any looming sadness to prevent the story from just putting us in the bell jar. Daveed Diggs has a small role, and I always love him, but he feels almost wasted in this. I mean, he's relegated to some very minimal dialogue exchanges. Now, I would have liked to have seen his character interact more with O'Dowd because it felt like there was some great chemistry and that dynamic wanted to lead someplace deeper than the story was willing to go. I think CGI is used for the bird sometimes, which would make sense, and while it looks good for the majority of the time, there were some sequences where the camera follows the bird over a longer course, and it did look and then even feel just a bit wonky. I think these can be fairly overlooked because they're not often, and they don't go on for an exorbitant amount of time. Now, there's a character played by Timothy Oliphant, and while he's minimally on screen, I found his character to be extremely off-putting, but I also think that is some of the point. It's almost as if he's clueless to McCarthy's situation, which did feel a little odd in the story, but I tried to chalk it up to him being more inconsiderate than anything. I really liked the journey that McCarthy's character goes on. I mean, as I said, this is a grief journey, but it's also a journey of restoration. McCarthy brings us along with her, almost inviting us to participate in the journey just right beside her, without actually having to be a participant. Now, there's a moment where she unintentionally harms an animal, and while it was tough to see, and even though it was brief, in the following moments is where we get to see some transformational growth in the character. We watch anger melt away to pure grief and regret, which then leads very nicely into some reconciliation and restoration. Now, this is an hour and 42 minutes, so it's not a massive time commitment, and while I was watching, I felt the story progressed along pretty efficiently. I do think it's a fairly predictable story arc, but for a story like this, that predictability is a comfort. There aren't any gotcha type moments, but it's not obvious in every single turn that the story then becomes uninteresting or boring. This was able to make me laugh out loud, chuckle some, and have my heart crushed and then put back together. I loved watching the painful discord between McCarthy and O'Dowd, hoping that it's going to lead to a point of understanding. All through their journey, they navigate their grief, both as individuals and then collectively. The movie may come across a bit schmaltzy to some, and it certainly plays into many stereotypical scenarios and arcs, and especially when you're looking at the grief story. but none of that really bothered me. I mean, I was enthralled by McCarthy's performance, and I loved how she created her character. I also really enjoyed the soundtrack in this. It's got some great contemporary folk pop that was both soothing and engaging. I mean, we have stuff from artists like Brandi Carlile, the Lumineers, Judah and the Lion, and Nate Ruess. So overall, this relationship drama that is centered around sorrow manages to connect us with grieving characters without leaving us to wallow in the agony. The characters learn and grow, find redemption from some very unexpected places, people, and then creatures. While this may not seem like it's a feel-good movie, I left with a satisfied soul, knowing the characters that I had connected with were on a trajectory towards healing. There's no sex or nudity, a bunch of profanity, and some violence. I give the Starling 4 out of 5 couches. Do you have a favorite performance from either McCarthy or O'Dowd? I'd love to know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.